Let's see his awaken skill. Wow!
7K Dreamer, please.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be looking at Mythical Awakened Sage. I managed to get him to level 44 and I'm just waiting for my next 3 copies to come before maxing him out to level 50. And I think he's actually a very fun unit to use, and this is currently the team I'm using. So I'm going to just explain why I'm using these heroes. So you realize that I took out Milia, and that was very painful for me actually, because I was kind of worried that, you know, without the 7 Knights of Old, I will not do very well. And it turns out that's not the case, and that's a very good thing. And as you can see here, he's using his bottom skill. His bottom skill actually deals fixed damage to 3 enemies the highest physical and magic attack, and also decreases their crit and lethal rate by 50%, and also increases skill cooldown by 30 seconds. So it's a very good skill comparatively to the top skill, and it applies a very huge nerf onto the enemies, and reducing their physical and magic attack by half can really give you additional survivability, especially for himself since he already reduces damage taken. And if you use Noah like me, physical attacks can barely do anything, because with Tara and Noah, physical enemies will not deal as much damage to magic allies, so that's a very good thing. As you can see, the team is already pretty much down. And over here, his awakened skill, it is surprisingly strong. As you can see, 750,000. That is pretty insane, okay? It has a very high multiplier and it ignores a lot of defense. On top of the defense he reduces with his passive, and deals damage based on max HP. So I'm a little bit unclear if this extra multiplier is based off his own max HP or the enemy's max HP. But regardless, it is insane, especially with the crit and lethal multiplier stacked. So I keep talking about his passive, so what exactly does it do? He decreases all damage taken by 50% for 6 turns. He decreases poison resist for all enemies by 20%. He decreases recovery rate for all enemies by 70%. And if you unlock his exclusive item at level 44, he decreases physical attack and defense of the enemies by 10% each turn, up to a maximum of 50%. So he has tons of decreases, and the most useful one is his exclusive item 1. So technically you just need him to survive up to turn 5, and chances are he will, because his passive halves all damage taken. So he is another unit that is very good, and even if he doesn't use any skills, it is totally fine. For his top skill, he deals 300% to 3 enemies and applies 60% lethal rate, has 80% chance to poison. The top skill doesn't do too much, but the poison status, okay, that is the key here, because it really syncs with his awakened skill to do additional damage. And poison also, I believe 90% of the player base do not have resistance against, so it is a very good status effect right now to use. So why do I love him so much after testing him out? Okay, the reason is because this team that I built is kind of revolved around Sage, even though we have Fenrir and Fi. So Fi is here to check for Milias and Chris's, basically universal type heroes. Fenrir is here for the overall team buff, and Fenrir is just too important to let go, of course. And Tara and Noah, both of them, you know, have their own status effects. Noah can burn and Noah can stun. Tara has suffocation. So Tara and Noah coupled together, Tara's passive basically reduces damage taken by magic allies from physical offensive enemies. So this means that Sage will receive a lot lesser damage on top of his passive. So if you think about it, how does poison work? Poison works when the enemy lands normal attacks on you and it will proc, right? And poison also spreads throughout the team, and poison is not removed over time unless you apply a debuff cleanse. Okay, and if you do not do that, then you're basically poisoned for the whole turn, whole match I mean. And think about it, Tara and Sage themselves have cooldown increase. So if you are able to cooldown lock the enemy, and if your enemy does not have a cooldown increase immunity, you are basically forcing them to use normal attacks, and in that case, if they are already poisoned, they will continuously take poison damage when they use their normal attacks. So I thought this was a really fun concept to play around with, and on top of that, I do have Electrify and Paralyze CC's status on my Tara and my Fi, so I have a huge load of status effects that I'm using. I have Poison, I have Stun, I have Burn, I have Igneous Flame, I have Suffocation, I have Paralyze, I have Electrify, I have... what else? Yeah, basically that's all. And as you can see, it sounds like a lot. How can, you know, an enemy be fully immune to all these? It's almost impossible, right? So that's the thing. The only problem I have against certain enemies is Chris, because Chris casts death and I actually don't have death resist, so I may need to look into that. So that's something you need to take note. But beyond that, I think, this team is pretty fun to use. I'm even thinking of trying to use Rin, but I just can't let go of Fenrir and Fire at the moment, so I decided that, I'll just forget about Rin. I took out Milia. Again, as I said, it's pretty painful, but I wanted to try Noah because Noah can really help. Noah and Tara, I mean, can really help Sage survive. And Noah's Awaken skill also removes debuffs, so that is very good, especially in the current climate of the arena meta where you have too many debuffs. So here again, he uses his Awaken skill, which is really strong, and I was very surprised because I didn't think too much about his offensive capabilities, even though he is a magic hero. Because if you look at his passive, if you look at his exclusive item, it is kind of defensive based, right? So that is why we're gonna go into his equipment. For his weapons, I've given him double crit because crit actually increases status effect cast rate, and that's what you want. You want him to be able to land the poison properly. And then lethal rate buff from Fenrir is already sufficient for him to deal enough damage. So he already has a 60% lethal rate, and on top, with his crit weapons, he has pretty high multipliers. For armor wise, he has HP armor. I've given him HP armor, and that is to increase the damage he deals with his Awaken skill. But again, I'm not too sure if the multiplier is based off his max HP or the enemy's max HP because the wording is kind of vague. And regardless, HP is always the safest choice. Now, if you realize that the multiplier is based on the enemy's HP, you can even use block armor. Why do I say that? Because his exclusive item, as I said, gives him 10% block rate. So coupled with the block armor, and I also gave him a block jewel, he can pretty much reduce all damage received by 75% in that case, because it halves and then it halves again, right? Which makes him a very tanky magic unit, surprisingly. And I think for his other jewels, I have given him increased skill use chance so that he can land the debuff. The debuff is super important to reduce the crit and lethal rate. If you realize throughout the match, when he lands the debuff, the enemies don't do too much damage at all to me, and that is a very important skill. And also increase his Awaken gauge charge speed so that he can quickly use the powerful Awaken skill. Now for his accessory, I've given him the Willful Ring because I think he has sufficient bulk. He has very good bulk in this team, so I think giving him more HP is a good thing. And also, the substat is actually a Galidus Madness. Now I think the Galidus Madness isn't something that is recommended. Not the top priority. I think if you use Isabella's Vigor, that is a lot better. So that he heals, he uses his skill and he heals, he constantly heals, and he doesn't take too much damage at all before turn 6. So I think it's a good substat to have. You can even use the Crimson Blood if you want to try, which reduces damage from 4 to 5 target attacks, which is common in the meta now. So for his traits, I've given him 3 resistances: Paralyze, Silence, and Stun. I believe all these are the more detrimental statuses. You can also give Bleed and Death if you like, but I think the Paralyze, Silence, and Stun are the more important ones. Yeah, so basically that's it for his build. So I think he works very well in the Magic team. However, the problem is with the meta right now. How can you actually afford to make a space for him to try him out when you have a lot more, stronger enemies like Fi, like Fenrir, like Milia, and sometimes that is the worrying part. I haven't really tried him, as you can see. I'm not in Grand Arena yet, so I don't exactly know how he will fare there, and I will want to try him out for sure. I think he's a pretty fun unit to use, especially in this team setup. But one thing I can say is that he's very good against the physical meta right now because they are more offensive based, they are more counter based, and Sage can actually tank a lot of hits from them. As you can see, we'll see how much the Fenrir does. As you can see, it's not a lot of damage. Maybe, the enemy himself doesn't have a very good build on Fenrir, but that's always one thing, because I realized that a lot of players at this stage do not have very well crafted or very high level berserker rings or something like that. So the damage they do may not reflect the actual higher tier level, but okay, let's just say you are using him because he is kind of like a free unit, right? So if you are using him at this stage, I think it is actually very good because as you can see here, everything is going very well. I haven't lost a match with him at this tier of arena. So, you know, some units may be good in higher tier, some units may not be so good in higher tier, but it really doesn't matter because where you at is the more crucial thing, right? It doesn't matter if you are... It won't make sense for you not to use a potential unit just by comparing your tier to a higher tier in arena. The higher tier arenas have their own kind of way of playing, and if you are still at this stage, you know, Sage is definitely a good hero you can try, especially with this team setup. And it's not very hard to build him. You don't need very fanciful or very well +5, you know, mythical weapons or whatsoever. I think he is still a very decent hero that you can try. Yeah, so my Phi is now my speed hero, my attack leader I mean, because I took out Lu Bu. So here he uses his debuff, which is very good. The earlier he uses it, the better it is for you actually. You can see that he blocks completely, right? And he took very little damage from Lu Bu's counter. Here Fenrir does land a crit and lethal damage on him, but it also doesn't do as much as the amount that Fenrir did to Phi, if you see carefully. So the enemy's Fenrir is pretty active. My Sage is already ready to use his Awaken skill. However, he doesn't really have the poison landed on the enemy, so that is a problem. So again, you may look into this. You may want to look into this. So the Milia here probably has a Berserker ring. She deals a lot of damage, but she thankfully didn't kill anyone, and my Sage still survives. And this Awaken skill, you can see it does a lot. And there's no poison. There's no poison even inflicted on the enemy. So can you imagine with the poison, that additional multiplier, 30% of their max HP, is gonna do even more and it's gonna probably just slay. So yeah, I mean, I think he's a really fun unit to use, and I'm not sure if you guys have been noticing, but Galidus really cannot stand up to the meta right now. He dies super fast. Even Milias actually. Milias are dying pretty fast right now. So the only thing that makes a Milia strong is the Berserker ring towards the later part of the match, because she can potentially wipe out your team. But you know, if she doesn't, and you have units like Fenrir and Phi, I think Milia also doesn't really stand a chance. And as you can see, Sage is actually living very well. Even more than Tara and Noah. But that's understandable because Sage does have more bulk than them, right? In terms of armor and passive all along the way. So yeah, that's my review for Sage. Let me know what you think, and if you actually thought he was gonna be this good, or did this video actually surprise you. Do let me know in the comments. Stay tuned for more videos. Do like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much and see you.